Hi guys, today we are going to talk about Civil War and talk about the major events, battles that happened, and kind of go through it, talk about why this is the most important part of our American history. Some could argue American Revolution was for obvious reasons. Some argue World War One to the Great Depression, but the Civil War was one of the biggest changes in the history of our country. First of all, we all know what happened at Fort Sumter. It was a cause of the Civil War. South Carolina seceded, tried to force the North to give up the fort. They refused. There was a siege, shots fired. The South ends up winning and taking the fort. So Fort Sumter was initially the beginning of the Civil War. We are going to talk about the other places. So we have the first Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, Virginia. Now, the funny thing is with all these battles, all the battles have two different names. The North always named the battles after the nearest body of water. So they named it the Battle of Bull Run Creek. The South always named it after the nearest town. So they named it the Battle of Manassas. So both are correct. The first Battle of Bull Run or first Battle of Manassas, depending if you're in the North or the South. It was the first major battle of the Civil War. It was in Bull Run Creek, Virginia, July of 1861. General McDowell led the North, 35,000 troops. Confederates were led by General P.G.T., I believe, Beauregard, with 22,000 troops. They met at Bull Run Creek in Manassas. Hundreds of people from the North gathered to watch the picnic and parade. They treated this like it was going to be a baseball game, really. They sat up on a hill, they gathered, picnic, parade. They were watching it. There were hot air balloons that kind of floated by. The North thought this was going to be a super easy victory, thought they were going to win the Civil War really quickly. And they kind of were taking it as a joke. So they all came out and watched it like it was a sporting event. 10,000 more Confederates arrived under General Thomas Jackson. General Thomas Jackson's a very important figure we're going to talk about here in a second. And there's the quote. Look, there's Jackson standing like a stone wall. This gives him the nickname of Stonewall Jackson. He was probably the second most famous general for the South behind Robert E. Lee. He was arguably the best strategist, very, very good with strategy, very secretive, didn't even tell his officers what he was doing. An amazing leader. If he doesn't die later on, there's a chance they have a little bit different outcome because of him. They just were short of troops. However, at First Battle of Bull Run, with Stonewall Jackson there and Beauregard there, they had Confederates win, which shocks the North. They realize the war is not going to be easy or quick, and Lincoln already, after one battle, starts to doubt his generals. This is an important theme. So here is the battle. This is Bull Run, clear up here. Here's McDowell, and then he retreats. Here's Beauregard coming up. Irvin McDowell was the North. Beauregard was the South. These numbers differ than the other numbers. You can see here, instead of 35,000, he has 17,600, and he has 18,000. These numbers are probably a little bit more accurate. This is a picture of Thomas Jackson, not the best looking guy in the world. He's kind of odd looking, but man, he was a strategist. Picture called Chaos at Manassas, showing the first battle. It was like unlike anything anybody there had seen before. And this is the picture now, where this was after the Civil War with your barricades and stuff set up. Soldiers walking around. Then we go into the second Battle of Bull Run. Believe it or not, they actually fight twice at the same place. This happened in August of 1862, so a little over a year later. Confederates this time with General Robert E. Lee. He's the granddaddy. He's the leader of all the Confederate Army. In the North, we have George McClellan. You might have heard that name if you're a horse person because of a McClellan saddle. I'm not sure if it's named after him or not, but he was the leader of the Union armies. So we got the actual leaders of the North and the leader of the Southern armies. In this battle, Confederates win again. This is Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was like the most famous general for the South during this time. He was born to a wealthy family in 1807. So during the Civil War, he was in his late 50s. He graduated from West Point. Remember, we talked about how it was the Southern way of life. All the young men went to the military school, so all the generals were from the South. He fought in the Mexican-American War. Another big important thing you're going to see is most of the people who are generals and officers during this fought for the U.S. in the Mexican-American War. He stormed Harper's Ferry with the Marines. If you recall what Harper's Ferry was, it was the revolt. So Lincoln asked him to serve for the Union, but he could not. He resigned, stayed loyal to Virginia, and became a Confederate general. He was very, very loyal to his state and to his people, and when they seceded, he seceded with them. The Second Battle of Bull Run, there wasn't much happening. It was really just, hey, we fought, and it was important because the South won again. There are many, many, many little battles that popped up all over the place, and we're only going to hit on a couple of the bigger ones today. We'll have some more tomorrow to hit on, but I'm not telling you about every battle. We're talking about the Battle of Bull Run. We're going to talk about Antietam. We're going to talk about Potomac, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Sherman's March. Those are the big ones we're going to talk about. We're not going to even talk about Fredericksburg or all the battles of this creek and the Battle of this creek. We're not going to do that. We're just going to focus on the main ones today. So the Battle of Antietam was September 17th, 1862. It was fought in Antietam, Maryland, and it was really, really important because it was the single bloodiest day in U.S. history. More people died on this day than any other day in the United States history in battles. General McClellan, again, with the North. Robert E. Lee with the South. So the two big dogs again. 12,000 Union, 13,000 Confederate casualties. Those are deaths and wounded. A lot of times when you got wounded, it kind of marked the end of you. So it was a lot of people who got hurt, died, had to have surgery, whatever. We'll talk about medical issues and weapons on Thursday, so you can see kind of why. And then it was an important victory for the Union. We finally win a battle. So important victory. We stopped the bleeding. Stop Lee's advance to the North. See, Lee's whole goal was to march through the North and conquer the North bit by bit, to split the North. And that was his goal to really win the war. So that stops it. However, McClellan made a huge error. He failed to follow Lee when he had the opportunity to kind of hit him with a knockout blow. He stopped, recovered, didn't track when Lee retreated, and didn't hit him with the knockout blow. So kind of what happened, September 4th, 1862, Lee and 40,000 Confederate troops arrive in Maryland. Lee issues a proclamation urging people in Maryland to join the Confederates. He was trying to get another state. Maryland was kind of one of those swing states, and it didn't quite work for him. They stay with the North. So Union soldiers find Lee's battle plans. Apparently he had dropped his cigar and his battle plans were wrapped around his cigar, as oddly as that sounds. They take it to McClellan. So now we have his battle plans, and McClellan is too timid and does nothing for 4 days. He lets Lee keep advancing. This marks the end for McClellan. He gets demoted after this. The armies clash at Antietam Creek. The South would call it Sharpsburg on September 17th, 1862. Single bloodiest day in American history. And the North ends up winning, and McClellan, he lets them advance instead of having the battle plans. He could have cut them off and surrounded them. and then he fails to go after him. So he's going to get relieved of duty. After the battle, Lincoln created the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was very simple. It basically was his statement saying all slaves are free, but there's a catch. Not in the North. Maryland, Washington, D.C., those places that had slaves still kept their slaves. He only freed the slaves in the states that seceded. It was a strategy to weaken the Southern war effort. He was basically saying, as of this moment, all slaves are free. Get the word out. The word passed down through on the Underground Railroad to the slaves in the South, and many of them ran away because they're free now. Remember, Confederate only. He then fired General McClellan, like I said, because he was sick of him being too soft. He put in charge Ambrose Burnside, and he's important because of sideburns. Mr. Ambrose Burnside / Sideburns, if you flip his name, took over. This is Antietam. We have Lee coming in. This is the sunken road. Here's Antietam Creek. We have Mr. Burnside's here coming through. Porter, McClellan up here, Sumner. Hooker is a big name. He was a big field general during the war. We got Stonewall Jackson, but basically they were coming, trying to march through here, the South. The North set up advance walls and held, and ended up defeating them throughout all of this. Excuse me. So they held ground, ended up defeating the South. South retreated. Mr. McClellan doesn't follow up. This is a picture of him. He was very timid, kind of sucked at his job. So here's Lincoln visiting Antietam. There he is sitting with McClellan. I believe this is U.S. Grant, General Grant. So there's Lincoln meeting with McClellan. Amazing picture. You got the flag, his top hat. They're meeting in the tent. So clear. It's crazy. These are soldiers at Antietam. There's more of a battle at Antietam. You got sniper. You got soldiers here. Horses and soldiers here. Soldiers there. Here's a drawing of it. This bridge. There's the bridge in real life with supplies gone over it. Bridge in real life. This is Antietam Creek. This is where they fought at, in this bridge, and here's the bridge now. It's still standing, so it's kind of crazy that you can see this piece of evidence where they fought for freedom and sectionalism and state rights and what they believed in so long ago. I mean, this is 155 years now, and that thing's still standing, been redone. So interesting. These are dead soldiers from Antietam, and you'll see a lot of those pictures during the Civil War. So McClellan kicked out. Ambrose Burnside was given command. He got destroyed at Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg was one of the worst boat whippings the North took. He was known for his sideburns, as you can tell. People, that's how they were named. They were named after him. He asked to be relieved after that. He knew he was in over his head and couldn't handle it. He said, please take this job away from me. So they relieved him and they put General Meade in charge. So General Meade is in charge of the North for quite a while. Emancipation Proclamation, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then thenceforward and forever free. Means any slave in a state that is involved in the rebellion against the United States are free as of this moment, forever. So the slaves did it. It has a little effect. It does throw them up a little bit of riot. They leave a little bit. By freeing slaves in all rebellious states in the South, the freed African Americans could then be recruited into the Union Army, and they got paid for that. And there is a movie about it called Glory, which is very, very fantastic, but it's 3.5 hours long. There's some vulgarity in it, but it's a very, very good movie. And this is Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. It goes into effect on January 1st, 1863, about halfway through the war. So what does it do? Here's some of the Buffalo Soldiers, as they were called, all black troops. The troops would have all black units with a white commander. So every slave working in a field or factory freed a white Southerner to fire a gun at Union soldiers. Slaves in areas of rebellion are free. Did not free slaves in the border states nor the Confederate areas under Union control. Also important. So I believe at this time Tennessee was under Union control. It would not have freed slaves because they were not seceded at the time. And then Congress began to allow African Americans to volunteer as laborers in July of 1862. So this was even before the Emancipation Proclamation. The War Department also gave contrabands, which are escaped slaves, the right to join the Union Army in South Carolina. So even in South Carolina, escaped slaves were able to fight. 180,000 African Americans served with the Union Army during this time frame. They wanted to fight for their freedom against the way of life that the South was trying to defend. So it makes sense for them to fight for this. This is for their rights. Hampton Roads is important because before this time, we only fought for wood-sided ships, big wood boats that would fire cannons. This was the first time that ironclad ships or metal ships fought each other. We have the Monitor in the north, and then we have the Merrimack in the south. The Merrimack got renamed to Virginia because Richmond, Virginia is the capital of the South, the Confederacy. They're both ironclad ships, and they're going to fight each other in Chesapeake Bay in Hampton Roads, Virginia. So this is kind of Chesapeake Bay is right there between Maryland and Virginia, and they're fighting in this bay. It's a massive, massive bay. There's no winners. The invention of ironclad ships does prove to be successful. They're shooting cannonballs, musket balls, stuff just bounces off the sides. So it proves very, very successful. There's a draw. There's no winners involved, but it was very important because the ironclad works. And as you can see, these are all like musket balls and cannonballs that have been shot into it. These are cannonballs, actually. So it's just denting. It's not doing any damage. And here they are kind of fighting. So the North is getting tired of this. They thought this was going to be a quick war. We are about 2 years into the war right now. Remember, this war starts in April of 1861, goes all the way through April of 1865. So it's 4 full years. It's 5 Aprils, but it's 4 full years. They're getting sick of them. So there is a group of Northern Democrats beginning to speak out against the war. They're called Peace Democrats, and they're led by an Ohio person, Ohio Representative Vallandigham. Their enemies called them Copperheads, comparing them to the poisonous snake. Copperhead was a big term to understand. Copperheads are Midwesterners that sympathized with the South and opposed abolition. They literally just said, we want to end the war. We don't care about freeing the slaves. So they're called Copperheads. It's a growing movement. It was a big movement during this time, and it was a scary movement during this time. Lincoln saw them as a threat, suspended the right of habeas corpus, the right to know what your crime is if you're jailed. So he basically gave people the right to imprison them without telling them why. Habeas corpus is the constitutional protection against unlawful imprisonment. Basically, it's saying in the Constitution you can't be imprisoned without knowing what you did. Some people thought Trump was bad. Lincoln's gone in here and suspending why you're being jailed. You can just literally be arrested for no reason at all. So now we get to the Battle of Gettysburg, arguably the most famous of all battles. Battle of Gettysburg was July 1st through the 3rd of 1863. Technically, July 4th is kind of known as the anniversary of it. It goes 1st through the 3rd and kind of winds down on the July 4th of 1863. I think it was a few years ago. Yeah, 2013, July 4th was considered the 150th um, anniversary of the battle, so they had huge celebrations and stuff there. Robert E. Lee, again, you're going to notice the trend that Robert E. Lee was in charge of the South the whole time. Now against George Meade of the North. Some other people in here, we'll talk about them, Thomas Jackson, U.S. Grant, talk about some of them, but this was the bloodiest, worst battle in the Civil War. By far, worst battle. It's over 3 days, and there is so much killing there. It's insane. It is known for Pickett's Charge on the South, where they charge up this hill that the North has, trying to get this hill, and they just get slaughtered. They're trying to run uphill. You know how hard that is, and now you're carrying guns and packs, and people are shooting at you coming downhill. It was a slaughter. It became a cemetery where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. Spring of 1863, Lee split his forces into two groups. While riding the front line, Stonewall Jackson gets shot by his own man. Jackson dies a few days later. A lot of people say this was on purpose. Some people say it was unintentional. Basically, he had a habit of leading his troops. They were going in the dark. Nobody really knew what they were doing because he didn't even tell his other officers the plans that they're doing. So he's riding out in front of his men, and they mistake him and shoot him. He ends up dying from it, which is a big turning point because he was their most successful battle general. He was a genius on the battlefield. Lee launches more attacks. His goal is to break the North's will to fight, which he's close to it. The Northern people are really sick of it. So Lee launches more attacks, trying to break the North. On day one, Confederates split into raiding parties in Pennsylvania looking for food and shoes in Gettysburg. Shoes were so important. They had the wrong sizes. They blistered, their feet hurt. They were marching so much, so it was really bad. So they were looking for food and shoes. Union troops and the Confederate raiding parties find each other and start shooting at each other. By day 3, a failed Confederate attack up on Cemetery Ridge. That is Pickett's Charge. That was the slaughter. Almost 75,000 Confederate soldiers and 90,000 Union soldiers fight in Gettysburg. Massive, massive amounts of people. Imagine 165,000 people fighting in a small area of Gettysburg. Casualties. Again, these are deaths and wounded. 23,049 for the North, 28,063 for the South. Think about why that's important. If you say the Union has a lot more people, so they can afford more casualties, you would be correct. The South doesn't have as many people. So when they have more casualties each battle, even if they win the battle, it's really, really hard on them. Victory at Gettysburg was on the same day as the victory in Vicksburg, which I don't know if we'll get to Vicksburg today. That's probably going to be tomorrow. But they both happened on the same day, and they were both super important. This is the turning point of the war for the North. The North wins Gettysburg. After Gettysburg, France and England refused to help support the CSA. Now, here's the catch. Meade fails to follow up General Lee. That's the problem with this whole thing is Meade could have followed up Lee right now and saved years of the war. Instead, he just sits there and lets them escape. And because of this, he only lasts another year, 6 months. This was in July of 1863. In March of 1864, they put U.S. Grant in charge, and it's all stemming from this. Meade was very aggressive when he was a battlefield commander, very aggressive, but for some reason, when he gets put in charge, he becomes passive and unwilling to take risk. At first, they think he's a really, really good leader. However, he has U.S. Grant on the battlefield with him. And U.S. Grant is actually the strategist behind everything. He's the one that's kind of in charge doing everything. Whereas General Meade is kind of, he's scared. He's fighting scared. So That leads to him getting relieved of duty 8 months later and U.S. Grant put in charge. This is General Meade's headquarters in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Just kind of a house he takes over. These are soldiers at Gettysburg. And yes, there are black and whites. These are some of the Union casualties that got killed at Gettysburg. And then it leads to the Gettysburg Address. Gettysburg Address was obviously very famous. So the Gettysburg Address, let's see if I can find it this way. Basically is this: 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a grand battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they have who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. What he is saying: everybody should be equal. When our country was established, they said all men are equal, even though they intended all white men, not female, not black. He's saying all men shall be equal. We're going to dedicate part of this as a cemetery, the Gettysburg Cemetery, but we can't tribute this as much as they did, giving their lives here for the freedom of everybody. And we're going to finish this, or else they died in vain. Let's not let them die for no reason. Let's go finish this and free the slaves. One of the most famous speeches of all time. He gave that speech on November 19th, 1863. So about 4 months after the battle. It was for the battlefield cemetery. It was 269 words, and it was less than a 2-minute speech, but it was one of the most powerful things I ever heard. Kind of renewed the fight in the North. It kind of got people back on their side. 15,000 people came to hear his dedication. So it was a huge, huge event for that time. It was about the state of the Civil War. And I just read that to you. So the cemetery dedication, believe it or not, there's Lincoln. These are people all around him. This is a copy of it. This is the battlefield now, or the cemetery now. We are going to stop there for today. I don't want to wear you out. We'll get into the siege at Vicksburg tomorrow. Major events coming. We're going to see how U.S. Grant takes over, even though he was a drunkard. We're going to see how ruthless U.S. Grant was. We'll start talking about Sherman's March and Sheridan's March. U.S. Grant is from Ohio, Mount Sterling, Ohio. Phil Sheridan is from Somerset, Ohio. That's actually where my family's from, so I've seen the statue many, many times, Sheridan High School. And we have General Sherman, who marches to the sea. He is from Reynoldsburg, Ohio. So kind of the three big generals that end the war for the North, all are from Ohio. So we'll talk about that, how important they are. Finish this up tomorrow. On Thursday, I'll talk to you guys about some of the battles and or sorry, not battles, but the weaponry, the new technology and weapons and what they did medically. And then we'll kind of end the week up with a little bit more. So have a great day. I'll talk to you guys later. If I can figure out how to close this.